Okay, this podcast is going to serve as a review for the Unit 3 exam for Algebra 1A Texas Virtual Academy. So let's just kind of get started. What I'm going to do, what I am doing right now is I am looking at a printed out version of the test that you will be taking. And I'm going to go through here and look at some of the problems that you're going to have to be able to know how to do. And I'm going to work some problems like them. And from time to time, I might even actually work a problem that is exactly on the test. So it's up to you to take notes and master these problems, and hopefully it will help you be very successful on the test. Get started. Well, the first thing we're going to have to be able to do is solve simple equations. You may be given an equation like something like that, and you have to solve for x. And you need to know that in order to get x by itself, you have to do the opposite operation to whatever is going on to the x. So what's happening over here, and this is a little bit tricky looking, I have a negative 2 plus x. But what I have going on is, remember, we have two sides of the equal sign. And kind of like an imaginary line is drawn right down the middle there, separating this equation into two pieces. And that imaginary line is drawn right through the equal sign. So on the left-hand side, I have 2 being subtracted from the left-hand side. I know that because it's negative. So I need to do the opposite of subtraction, which is add. So I add 2 to each side. This cancels because negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Bring down what's left. I have x equals 5 plus 2 is 7. And I'm done. X equals 7. Very simple. Hopefully we can manage that. Some other type of problem we may have, maybe you have a word problem where it says write an algebraic equation for the following. The sum of twice a, the sum, this is a separate problem, of twice a and 4 times y is equal to 13. So how do we do that? How do we write an algebraic equation from a sentence? Well, let's look at the key words we have here. Here's some key words. Sum, twice, a. That's a variable. Twice a. That's a is representing an unknown. And 4 times y is equal to. Is and equal is the same thing. Sometimes equal will be left out and it'll just say is. Like this could have said y is 13. Is means equals. Okay. Sum means add. Twice means 2 times. Okay. And this times, that means multiplication. So let's take a look at how I would do this. The sum of twice a number, or twice a, okay, the sum, that's plus, of twice a, see, 2 times a, twice a, and 4 times y. Well, 4 times y looks just like that, because multiplication is represented between a number and a variable when they're right beside each other. So this right here is how you would write the sum, here's the sum, the plus, of twice a, there's twice a, and 4 times y, there's 4 times y, is equal to 13. Bam, done right there. That's how you would do that problem. That's how you would answer it. And good luck with that problem, and you might see it again. Let's continue on. Okay, so far we've solved an equation, and we have read a word problem and made an equation from that word problem. And Let's look at another solving equation problem that might be a little bit more difficult. I still have to get x by itself. I want to solve for x here. So what's going on with x? Well, x is being multiplied by negative half. So I have to divide by negative 1/2. Okay, now this can get a little bit tricky. But what I need to do is I'm going to write this in two different ways. I have to divide both sides by negative half. And this side, I should already know that anything over or divided by itself, that's just 1, and those cancel, and that's no problem at all. So what's left on the left-hand side of the equal sign is x. But this is confusing. 4 divided by negative 1/2 or 4 over negative 1/2. Rewrite this. Whenever you do division like this, rewrite it and make it look like this. 4 divided by negative 1/2. Then just use your calculator. Make sure you put parentheses around the 1/2, the negative 1/2, in your calculator. If you don't do that, it should look like this in your calculator. 4 divided by negative parenthesis 1 over 2. That's how you would put this in a Texas Instruments calculator. Okay? Now, some of you might be wondering, how would you do this by hand? Well, the way you divide fractions, first of all, you have to make the left side a fraction by putting it over 1. And the way you divide fractions is keep, switch, flip. What does this mean? It means you keep the first fraction. You switch this symbol to multiplication, and you flip the last fraction. Then multiply top times top and bottom times bottom. First of all, this is positive and this is negative. That means my answer is negative. 4 times 2 is 8. 1 times 1 is 1, and negative 8 over 1 is negative 8. My answer x is negative 8. Now, if you could not do that, or that makes you confused about doing this operation with division here with these fractions, remember, you can use the calculator. Use your calculator. Okay? All right, moving on. What if I have an equation that looks like this? Okay, I still want to get x by itself. What's going on with x? X is being divided by 8, so I have to do the opposite of division, which is multiplication. So I want to multiply each side by 8. So these cancel. What's left over is x, and then whatever 4.1 times 8 is. You can do that little calculation there, little multiplication, but again, you're using the calculator. And since I don't have my calculator up, I'll just go old school here. 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 4 is 32. And I say old school, but this is just the by hand method. You have one decimal place that goes there. And so your answer is 32.8. X equals 32.8. But again, I'm not testing you over multiplication and division. So use your calculator. If I can spell it. Use your calculator. Okay, for any division and multiplication. The only thing I'm testing you over is that you know that when x is being divided by 8, you have to multiply both sides by 8. Okay, continuing. What about a word problem where you have to make the equation and then you have to solve the equation? Here's one. Nick made a 90 on this week's math test? This grade was twice last week's grade. What was last week's test grade? Now, some of you may be thinking, well, that's easy. But let's work at how we would write this equation. You might need to know how to write the equation. So, Nick made a 90 on this week's test grade. This was twice last week's test grade. And what was last week's test grade? Well, here's how it would work. If it made a 90 this week, and that grade was twice last week's, well, what are we looking for? We're looking for last week's. Last week, we'll have to call that X because we don't know. So this week is twice that. So that means that I have 90 is twice last week's. So I use that keyword is there for my equal sign. 90 is twice last week's test. Divide by 2, and I get X equals 45. She didn't do too good, or he didn't do too good last week. Made a 45. Continuing on. Let's do a multiple step equation. Okay, so I have what I call a nasty looking fraction. And the reason why I call that a nasty looking fraction is because in the numerator I have an expression by itself, 3x minus 8. And I want to get rid of this nasty looking fraction. And I can do that if I think about it this way. 3x minus 8 is being divided by 12, and I want this 12 gone. So that means I want the 3x minus 8 by itself. So I got to figure out what's going on with the 3x minus 8. And what's going on with this 3x minus 8 is it's being divided by 12. So I have to multiply by 12 on both sides. Those cancel. What's left? Everything that's left, 3x minus 8 equals, and then 9 times 12 is 108. Continuing, still trying to get x by itself, but I have 3 being multiplied with the x, and I have 8 being subtracted from the 3x. Well, what do I do next? Remember I told you when we solve equations, we use PEMDAS backwards. So instead of parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division from left to right first, and then adding and subtracting from left to right last, we do our adding and subtracting first. So I've got this minus 8 here, so I'm going to have to do the opposite, which is add. So I'm going to add 8 to each side. Bring everything else back down. Now, I keep saying bring everything else back down, but it is very important. 108 plus 8 is 116. Very important that you learn how to solve and write these equations down and work them out the way that I'm showing you. Because if you don't learn how to do this now, when the equations get very difficult, you're not going to have a system of being able to solve them. Okay? So make sure you're writing this and modeling this, writing it down exactly how I'm modeling it. Okay? Now I've got 3 and x being multiplied. My last step, I need to divide by 3. on both sides, and I get x is equal to, when I use my calculator and I divide this by 3, 38.66 repeating. And that's how that works. Now, another way you might be questioned on the test is you may be given this problem that I started with here at the beginning. And you might be asked, what would your first step be when you're trying to solve for x? Okay? And so you need to know, just like we did the first step, you need to know that our first step here was to multiply by 12. So you need to know that if I was asking you what's the first step, you would say, well, multiply both sides by 12. And you got it. They may not even ask you to solve this entire problem like we did. All right, continuing on. You may have a problem like this. And they may say, well, what's the first step in solving this problem? And you need to know, you have variables on both sides, okay? But the first step is you must distribute here. So 4 times x is 4x. 4 times 2 is a plus 8. Bring the rest down. You did nothing with the rest of it, so just bring it down. It stays in the problem. Okay? Now let's go ahead and solve the rest of this. I have variables on both sides. I've got variables on the left. I've got variables on the right. I have to decide. I also have, before I say what I have to decide, I also have constants on the left and constants on the right. Remember, constants are the variables, or I'm sorry, excuse me, constants are the numbers without variables. So what do I do here? I have to decide which side to keep my variables on and which side to put my constants on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and decide to keep my variables on the left-hand side of the equal sign. It will work both ways. Matter of fact, I will show you both ways. If I decide to keep my variables on the left, x is being added to the right because of this plus sign here, so I subtract x from both sides. 4x minus x is 3x. Can I subtract the x from the 8? No, because they're not like terms. Here is a constant, this is a variable. So just bring this plus 8 back down, equals, bring this 10 back down. These are gone. Since I took my variables to the left, I know I'm going to take my constants to the right. So I have 8 being added to the left side, so I subtract 8 from both sides. This goes away, draw my little line, bring everything else back down. 10 minus 8 is 2, and I divide by 3, and I get that x is equal to 2/3, or that decimal, which would be 0.66 repeating, using your calculator. Okay, if they ask you to solve that. Now, I told you I would show you both ways. Let me give myself a little room here. Okay, that's enough. Right there. Okay, if I have, I'm going to go back to this part right here. If I have 4x plus 8 equals 10 plus x, before I brought my variables to the left, let's take my variables to the right side. So 4x is being added to the left side of the equal sign. Remember, this is separated. It's being added to the left side of the equal sign, not because of this plus sign do I know that, but because it's positive. Remember, the sign in front of the number goes with the number. So I subtract 4x from both sides. I can't subtract 4x from this x because, I can't subtract 4x from this 10 because they're not like terms. So I bring the 8 down, equals 10. X minus 4x is minus 3x, using your calculator. Since I took my variables to the right, I'm going to take my constants to the left. I subtract 10 from each side. Bring everything else back down. Remember, the sign in front of the number goes with the number, and if it's minus in front, you've got to bring that down with it. 8 minus negative 10, that's going to be negative 2. Divide by negative 3, divide by negative 3. Negative divided by negative is positive, so x is equal to 2/3. Works the same way. Same answer. This way over here was a little bit more difficult. That's why I like to look at things and think about it. If I take my 4x over here like I did on this side and bring it over here, that's going to make my x's negative. I try not to work with negatives if I don't have to. And I knew if I subtracted x from each side and brought it over here, that would keep my x's positive, and that might be a little bit easier to work with. So keep those things in mind. Okay, we've got lots of equations. You've had lots of practice. I would tell you to definitely probably look over your homework assignments maybe on some of those solving equations to make sure that you are familiar with solving equations. And while I'm saying that, make sure you do all your homework. Some of you guys haven't completed your homework assignments or your quizzes, and you need to make sure you do those things so you'll be prepared for this test. Okay, ratios. And so if I give you a ratio, I might say which of the following is equivalent to this, okay? For example, I might say, is this equivalent to 2/3? Well, what you have to do is simplify it. This has a common term of 4 because 16 is divided by 4 and 24 is divided by 4. So 16 divided by 4 is 4. 24 divided by 4 is 6, but it's still, you can still reduce it because actually the greatest common factor is 8. But let's go ahead and just reduce this again. These two have a common factor of 2. And so 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. And they are equivalent. So your answer will be yes, they are equivalent. They are equivalent ratios, or they are equal. Okay? What if I gave you a proportion to solve? And we did a lot of this week, so I'm going to kind of show you a couple problems here real quick. I may give you a proportion like this, and I may ask you to solve it, and you need to know you got to cross multiply. So I cross multiply here, and I get 9 times n is 9n equals 11 times 36. And use your calculator for that calculation. 11 times 36 is 396 equals 9n. See, I just brought the rest back down after I simplified here. I brought the rest back down. 9 and n are being multiplied, so I do the opposite of multiplication, which is division. Divide by 9, divide by 9. And I get n is equal to 44. So you're going to have to be able to cross multiply and divide to solve proportions. You may be given a word problem of a proportion. You write this down. This is a different problem. I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to tell you what to expect. You could be given a word problem, and you may be asked which proportion in the multiple choice it gives you fits the problem. Okay? So make sure you can do that. Just kind of read through them, make sure you set it up. Remember, if you have, we talked about, actually I'll do one in a second. Let me go through this. Let's talk about writing decimals. Decimals to percents and percents to decimals. If I have 4% and I want to convert that to a decimal, I have to move the decimal 2 places to the left. Well, the decimal's not here. That means 4 is a whole number and the decimal goes here. So I move it 2 places to the left. There's nothing here, so I put the decimal here. Since there's nothing here, I put a 0 in there. So 4% as a decimal is 0.04. Okay, continuing on. If I want to convert a percent a decimal to a percent, I just work backwards. If I wanted to go here and convert 0.04 to a percent, I move it 2 places to the right, which gives me 4%. Okay? If I give you a problem, what is 12% of 55? And we talked about this today in our algebra camp. This keyword of means to multiply. So I've got to multiply 12% times 55. But you can't multiply by a percent. You have to multiply by the decimal equivalent. So I have to turn this 12% into a decimal by moving the decimal 2 places to the left. That's 0.12. Multiply that times 55 in your calculator, and whatever that answer is, that would be your solution. So 2 parts here. Of means to multiply, and you must convert that percent to a decimal. And I'm going to work one more problem with you, and I think that that's pretty much going to cover everything that we need to talk about on this exam. And that is a word problem involving percents with either discounts. We talked about this quite a bit at length today in the algebra camp, so if you were there, you benefited from that. So I'm just going to work this. And I will tell you that this is probably a problem that will be on your test. Somebody bought a pair of jeans and they cost $88. This was the tag. That was what the price was on the tag. But the store is having a 25% discount. Okay, 25% discount. How much was marked off the original price? So we have to find this discount. So it says how much was marked off. What we have to do is we have to find what is 25% of $88. And remember, this key word of means to multiply. But we don't want to multiply by the 25%. We want to multiply by the decimal equivalent, which is 0.25. So 0.25 times 88. And when I multiply that in my calculator, I get 22. So the discount was $22. Now, this particular problem is going to ask you what is the discount, and this would be the answer. But what if they asked you the new price? If they ask you the new price, then you would have to subtract this $22 and get that the new price is $66. Okay? So pay attention to what's being asked. If you were looking for just the discount, that's $22. But if you're asking for the new price, you have to subtract that discount from the original price. Now, I do want to do one more problem. It's like this, but different. With discounts, you subtract those percentages. But if you're being taxed on an item or tipping someone, then you're going to add those percentages at the end. Let's say you go in and you want to buy a pair of shoes. And let's say the pair of shoes cost $45. This was the cost. And let's say that the tax was 8%. 8% tax. I want to know what is the tax and what is the amount I have to pay for the shoes total. So I have to find out what is 8% of $45. Now again, I'm not going to multiply. This key word still means to multiply. And this is very important. You remember that means to multiply. Of means to multiply. But I'm not going to multiply by 8%. I'm going to multiply by the decimal equivalent. So I move the decimal 2 places to the left. There's nothing there, so I put a 0. So I'm going to multiply 45 times 0.08. And that gives me 3.6, but I need to add a 0 on there because it's dollars and cents is 2 decimal places there. So my tax is $3.60. But my total price is going to be the $45 plus the $3.60. This plus $3.60, okay? And so when you plug that in your calculator and you get $48.60. And that is how you work a tax or a tip problem. You have to remember that if it's a tax or a tip, you're going to add the percent at the end, okay? The percentage, I'll say. Whatever you find this number to be, you would add that at the end. If it's a discount, you have to subtract. Okay, so I think that's going to serve for a pretty decent review. We worked several problems of the different types of things you might be expected to work on your Unit 3 exam. Here's what you need to do. You need to view this podcast, stop it, pause it, fast forward, rewind, view it as many times as you need to. And on any of these problems that you ever run into something where you get stumped or you're struggling, next week I will be testing, but you can go ahead and you can send me a message and let me know. IM, telephone call, whatever you need to do, let me know that you're struggling, and I'll try to get with you and help you out when I can. Have a good one and good luck in your studies.